Vek Lor Santris prided himself on his control. As a warrior of the Krell Imperium, he had trained for years to conquer fear, to tame not just his own instincts, but those of the mighty Drakar beasts his people rode into battle. Their scaled hides, their fiery breath, even the seasoned veterans sometimes flinched. But not Vek. He was destined to lead a Talon squad, to claim new worlds in the name of the Emperor. Then came the diplomatic mission to Earth. A backwater planet, the intelligence reports assured him. Newly inducted into the Galactic Concord, these humans were soft, their weapons primitive. A formality mission show Krell might, and these meek creatures would fall in line like the rest. But the lead ambassador, old Griv na Krath, was shaking. That low, guttural hiss the humans called laughter echoed through the reception hall. At its center, the human female strolled casually beside a creature that dwarfed even a veteran Drakar. Pristine white fur, claws that could cleave through armor, eyes like shards of black ice. Polar bear, the female had said, voice ringing with amusement. It tilted its immense head, studying the Krell delegation. Vek had never understood the feeling they called nausea until that moment. His heart thrummed in a discordant rhythm, his warrior's instincts screaming at him to flee. Yet he held his ground, shame burning hotter than any Drakar flame. This was not the fear a worthy foe instilled, the battle thrill before the charge. This was something primal, a terror his training hadn't prepared him for. Trickery, Griv finally snarled, tail lashing in agitation. Some kind of projection. The human laughed again, patting the bear's flank as it settled onto its haunches, a mountain of muscle and predatory grace. Ambassador, I assure you, Misha here is entirely real. He just enjoys warm weather more than some of his cousins. The rest of the meeting was a blur to Vek. Data displays on human agriculture, trade routes, it was meaningless. Even as Griv regained his composure, posturing over resource agreements, all Vek could see was the gentle way the woman rested a hand on the bear's head, the beast's guttural rumble that sounded almost affectionate. It defied logic. This creature could rip him apart in an instant, yet it obeyed her. More than obeyed, there was a bond between them. An impossible thought echoed in his mind. What if the Krell had been wrong all along? What if true power lay not in dominating a beast, but in earning its trust? The return voyage was agony. Vek sequestered himself away, poring over every scrap of data he could find on these humans and their polar bears. It wasn't the sleek starships or the planetary defense arrays that chilled his blood, it was old archival footage. Wolves running beside human hunters, sleek as shadows. War horses with eyes blazing, sharing the rage of the warriors on their backs. One grainy video showed a human man wrestling playfully with an enormous brown bear, rolling in the mud amidst laughter. They were frail compared to other species, lacking natural armor or venom. Yet, somehow, they forged these alliances with creatures that sent even the mighty Krell skittering for cover. Each example chipped away at the foundation of his beliefs. The Krell built their empire on the backs of conquered beasts, their battle tactics perfected over centuries of brutal subjugation. If humans could achieve this bond without whips or neural implants, what did that say about his people? Upon arriving home, scorn was heaped upon him. His fear was mocked, his warnings dismissed. Yet, the elders reluctantly agreed to indulge his obsession. Earth studies were relegated to dusty archives, a young warrior's folly. But Vek devoured them, analyzing everything from history to children's picture books. His breakthrough was not in a grand scientific treatise, but a simple tale titled Call of the Wild. A dog, separated from its human, braving a harsh wilderness to return home. The words were simple, but the sentiment, it mirrored the Krell sagas of honor and loyalty that had stirred him as a youngling. Yet, while the Krell demanded fealty through the lash, this human-dog bond seemed built on something far less tangible. Respect, trust, even love? The word tasted like ash on his tongue. Warriors didn't love, they conquered. And yet, there it was, in image after image. A human soldier, tears streaking his face as he cradled his dying horse. A farmer woman, sharing her meager meal with a barn cat curled in her lap. The more he immersed himself in this strange human world, the more Vek realized these bonds were their hidden strength. It wasn't just the polar bear, it was woven into their very history. News of a conflict on the Concord's frontier shattered the quiet of Vek's studies. The Xylari, a ruthless insectoid race, were pushing into a sector of unaligned worlds. The Krell had little stake in these remote territories, but protocol dictated sending at least a token force. Vek volunteered without hesitation. The chaos he met on the scarred surface of Kythos Roman III was nothing like the disciplined Krell war zones. Xylari swarmed, screeching battle cries that set his teeth on edge. His Drakkar mount recoiled from the chitinous stench, its flame burst more desperate than tactical. But amidst the mayhem, Vek spotted a flash of white fur. The human was female, young, with a defiant fire in her eyes. A hulking polar bear surged beside her, not adorned in armor and control nodes like the Krell's subjugated beasts, but with only a simple leather collar. It moved as though an extension of her, weaving through the Xylari lines, each swipe of its claws a killing blow. Not wild rage, but calculated defense. "Incoming," she barked, a command the bear instinctively obeyed, throwing itself before her as a Xylari warrior lunged from the smoke. Even as Vek's own Drakkar unleashed its fiery breath, a pang of jealousy shot through him. The bond between the woman and her bear was undeniable. They fought not as rider and beast, but as one. The tide of the battle turned, not due to superior Krell firepower, but the disruption caused by the human and her small squad. They targeted Xylari commanders, breaking their rhythmic screeches and buying precious time for allied forces to regroup. The woman moved with reckless courage that bordered on insanity, yet the bear at her side was her unyielding shield. "Extraction team, get them out!" Vek heard himself yell across the comms, the words surprising even himself, but they echoed the frantic signals from the Krell admiral. These humans weren't just a curiosity. They were an asset, a sliver of hope against the Xylari tide. Anya swore under her breath, clutching at Misha's thick fur as the evac shuttle rattled towards the orbiting Alliance cruiser. Her ears were ringing, the stench of blaster fire thick in the air. Misha whined, not from pain, thankfully, but the same restless energy that coursed through her own veins. "We got 'em, boss," her comms crackled with relief, and she allowed herself the ghost of a smile in response to her squadmate, Finn. They'd pulled it off again. Minimal casualties, maximum disruption, the hallmark of a good Beastmaster team. Well, as good as it could get in this damned war the humans had been pulled into. Landing in the hangar bay was a chaotic scramble. Doctors swarmed in, checking Misha over as much as herself. A few stern glances at the gashes on his flank that she'd hastily bandaged in the field. Humans were still getting used to the sight of her working alongside a polar bear, no matter how many times they'd saved their collective hides. "Commander Morozov requests your presence," a clipped voice cut through the din. A Krell officer, scales the color of old blood, eyes narrowed. She knew the look, suspicion mixed with a grudging sort of respect. The debriefing was held in a sterile conference room high above the scarred planet. Generals, admirals, and her. Anya still wasn't used to her place at this table. Just a few years ago, she'd been radio collaring bears in the Arctic, not planning strike missions against an alien horde. The Krell commander, Griv or something like it, gestured to the holo display. "Your asset proved remarkably effective at disrupting Xylari command structure," he rasped, his translator struggling with the right words. "They seem unusually vulnerable to your tactics." Anya shrugged, trying to look nonchalant sitting across from the hulking reptilians. "Their whole thing is the hive mind thing, right? You take out enough leaders, the grunts get confused." "And the bear?" A human admiral cut in, his face weathered. "You understand its capabilities better than anyone." Here it comes, Anya thought. The questions they were all dancing around, the reason she was here, and not catching a few hours of sleep before the next drop. "Misha's good at what he does," she said, deliberately vague. He protects me. Keeps my head on my shoulders out there." "Could more be trained?" The Krell commander leaned forward. "These bonds replicated?" His eyes gleamed with a hungry ambition that made Anya's skin crawl. The question hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Anya had been dreading it. The scientists back on Earth were fascinated by her ability, the way she could understand Misha's grunts, the subtle shifts in his body language that even seasoned zoologists missed. Now, the generals wanted to turn that into a weapon. "I don't train Misha," she finally stated, her voice firm. "We work together, and it's not something you can just replicate." The Krell commander hissed, something that might have been a laugh. "We have dominated beasts far mightier than your primitive bear, our neural technicians." "And how's that working out for you?" And you cut him off, her patience worn thin. "You strap those control rigs on your mounts, and they turn into half-crazed battering rams. They're too busy fighting the tech to fight the enemy." An uncomfortable silence descended. She'd crossed a line, but Anya didn't care. Misha wasn't some disposable tool, and neither were the other animals she and the handful of other Beastmasters had begun working with. An older woman with silver at her temples, a scientist if Anya read her badges correctly, cleared her throat. "Commander Morozov," she addressed Anya directly, "would you be willing to demonstrate how this partnership functions?" Anya blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected that. Out in the field, you mean?" "No," the scientist smiled faintly, "something less dramatic, but equally important, I assure you." Hours later, Anya found herself in the cruiser's recreation deck, of all places. The space had been cleared out, leaving a large, empty area that made her feel oddly vulnerable. Misha, at least, seemed less bothered by the sterile environment, sniffing with mild curiosity at the observation windows high above. A few Krell, the scientist, and a handful of humans Anya vaguely recognized from Alliance Command watched from behind a transparent barrier. The Krell commander loomed amongst them, his expression unreadable. "All right, Misha," she murmured, taking a deep breath, "let's show them what we can do." But what exactly? She'd never performed her bond with Misha. It was a connection felt, not displayed. Yet, as Misha tilted his massive head towards her, an idea sparked. "Remember the glacier caves, buddy?" she asked, dropping her voice. "That narrow tunnel we squeezed through?" The faintest shift in his posture, the way his ears perked, the others wouldn't notice, but to Anya, it was a clear response. He remembered. "Good," she said, nodding, and then turned towards the observation barrier. "Misha and we don't use commands, not really. We communicate, and over time, we build trust." She walked forward, not towards the bear, but towards a far corner of the room. Anya could feel the eyes on her, the confusion. Misha hesitated, and then with a grace that never failed to surprise her, he padded after her. "He's just following you," the Krell commander stated, a hint of disdain in his voice. "This proves nothing." Anya closed her eyes briefly, fighting the urge to snap back. Instead, she turned and knelt directly in Misha's path, close enough to feel the rumble of his breath. "Misha," she said clearly, "stop." The bear halted, his head lowered, not in aggression, but in a questioning tilt. In the enclosed space, his size was overwhelming. Anya could see the tension ripple through the onlookers. Surely they expected him to ignore her, even perhaps lash out in confusion. "Misha, sit," she continued, her voice steady. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the bear lowered his haunches. A ripple of surprise passed through the observation room, but Anya wasn't focusing on them. Her gaze was locked with Misha's. "Good boy," she whispered, reaching out to gently scratch behind his ear. It was a simple exchange, devoid of the drama of a battlefield. Yet, in that moment, Anya could feel the shift in the room. The Krell commander's arrogance faltered, replaced with a grudging curiosity. The scientist's eyes were alight, not with the cold calculation Anya often saw, but something warmer, understanding, perhaps. "Now," she said, standing, "Misha, walk." She stepped back, pointing towards the opposite end of the room. The bear hesitated for just a moment, then rose and lumbered forward, his movements fluid despite his bulk. At the indicated spot, he stopped and turned, facing Anya as though waiting for further instructions. "This is the foundation," she addressed the onlookers. "Obedience isn't the goal. It's about understanding, anticipating a partner's needs. In combat, Misha covers my blind spots, senses ambushes I can't. He doesn't need commands for that, because we trust each other." The Krell snorted. "Trust is a weakness. A warrior must dominate his mount." "And that's why your beasts are clumsy on the battlefield," Anya countered sharply, her patience finally snapping. "You treat them like weapons, not allies. It might work with those Xylari bugs, but out there," she gestured vaguely towards the stars beyond the viewport, "there are more complex enemies. Ones you won't defeat through brute force alone." She turned away, not waiting for a response, and walked towards Misha. Resting her hand on his massive head, she looked up at him. "Come on, buddy, let's get out of here." The dismissal was deliberate. Anya had shown them what she was willing to share. Whether they understood, whether they dropped their obsession with weaponizing her connection to Misha, that was up to them. The fallout from the demonstration was less dramatic than Anya had anticipated. No sudden change in alliance tactics, no grand speeches about interspecies cooperation replacing the usual wartime protocols. Yet, a shift had occurred, subtle but undeniable. The Krell, grudgingly, began seeking Anya's advice. Questions about bear behavior, how best to navigate icy terrain, small things, carefully phrased to preserve their facade of superiority. Anya answered them in the same vein, offering practical information without delving into the deeper complexities of the bond she shared with Misha. She found unexpected allies in some of the human scientists. Dr. Ellis, the woman who'd organized the odd performance, began visiting her quarters, bringing data on animal communication and historical records of legendary human-animal partnerships. They spent long hours debating the ethics of the Beastmaster program, exploring the blurry lines between mutual respect and a different kind of control. Most importantly, Anya was allowed to continue working as she saw fit. There were uncomfortable meetings, veiled suggestions about scaling up the program, breeding bears for combat, even those dreaded neural enhancement experiments. But each time, she pushed back, and each time, to her surprise, they relented. It seemed her display with Misha had earned her a degree of grudging respect, a sliver of autonomy within the sprawling war machine. Then came the mission that changed everything. A distress call, not from a besieged planet, but from a remote research outpost. Dr. Ellis herself was among the trapped scientists, her last frantic transmission mentioning some kind of biological anomaly before the signal cut out. They dropped into an icy wasteland, Anya and a hastily assembled squad shivering in the sub-zero temperatures. Misha, at least, seemed unfazed by the hostile climate, his thick fur a shield against the biting wind. The outpost was eerily silent, sensors detecting faint life signs amidst a confusing array of bio-readings unlike anything they'd encountered before. "What the hell happened here?" Finn muttered as they cautiously advanced into the outpost's central dome. Anya didn't have an answer, just a cold knot of dread in her stomach. The source of the anomaly became horrifyingly clear as they ventured deeper. Bodies, both human and Krell, the outpost had been a joint research project, were strewn amidst shattered equipment. But it wasn't the violence that shocked Anya, it was the way the bodies were fused with the ice itself, as though some monstrous force had twisted nature against them. "Movement!" a squadmate shouted, and suddenly, they were under attack. Creatures Anya couldn't even classify lunged from the shadows, their forms a grotesque patchwork of ice and organic tissue. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Blaster fire barely seemed to faze the monstrous creatures, their icy hides deflecting the energy blasts. Anya found herself separated from her squad, Misha surging forward to shield her from a clawed attack. There was too little space to maneuver within the cramped corridors of the outpost, and the cold began to seep even through her insulated suit. Over the comms, she heard shouts of pain, pleas for backup that went unanswered. And amidst it all, a new sound, a chilling, mournful howl that echoed through the shattered facility. "Misha!" Anya called out, fear lacing her voice. The bear was a blur of white fur, weaving through the melee, but then he vanished down a side corridor, the strange howl echoing louder. She had to make a choice. Her squad needed her, the mission was in jeopardy, but Misha was out there alone. Dr. Ellis, the lives lost. It all seemed meaningless if she abandoned her partner. Fall back, she yelled into her comms, knowing it was reckless, probably suicidal. Misha was her responsibility. Spinning, she plunged into the corridor, the monstrous howl her only beacon. The ice formations here seemed even more twisted, like grasping claws reaching out from the walls. Anya slipped, her breath catching in her throat, as a creature burst from a side tunnel. But before it could strike, a blur of white surged past. Misha slammed into it, sending them both tumbling in a flurry of fur and claws. Misha, no! Anya scrambled forward, her blaster aimed. But as she got closer, she saw what had drawn Misha away. It wasn't another of the ice monsters. Curled amidst the grotesque formations was a cub. A polar bear cub, its fur stained with blood, whimpering in terror. The monstrous creatures were converging, drawn by the scent of their vulnerable kin. There was no time for a plan, no hope of backup. Just Anya, Misha, and an innocent creature caught in a nightmare. Misha, she whispered, the bear turning to face her, his eyes reflecting the same grim determination that burned in her own heart. We protect him. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Not the barked commands of a handler, but a plea born of the bond between them, a silent promise that she would fight to the bitter end to ensure their survival. The fight that followed was unlike anything Anya had ever experienced. Misha became a whirlwind of protective fury, his every move driven not just by instinct, but by an understanding of their desperate situation. Anya darted and ducked, her blaster fire targeting vulnerable spots she learned only through countless hours spent observing Misha, through understanding the limitations and strengths of his body. When a creature lunged for the cub, Misha roared, deliberately drawing its focus, allowing Anya a clear shot to its bulbous eye, exploding in a spray of icy shards. It was a dance of desperation, a ballet of blood and ice. Misha's fur was matted crimson, gashes marking his powerful flanks. Anya stumbled, her vision blurring from a blow to the head, feeling the sting of countless icy scratches. Yet they fought on, each movement fueled by a defiant, primal urge survival. Gradually, the creatures began to hesitate. Their mindless rage couldn't overcome the coordinated defense, the unwavering determination that radiated from the human and her bear. The mournful howls intensified, turning into shrieks of frustration, and then something akin to retreat. One by one, the grotesque creatures backed away, melting into the shadows from whence they came. Anya slumped against the freezing wall, her body screaming with pain, her breath ragged. Misha, with a final protective growl, approached the cub, nosing it gently. It whimpered, then, with surprising strength, nuzzled against his bloodied fur. "We did it, buddy," Anya whispered, her voice cracking. She stumbled towards them, her knees nearly buckling under her. Misha nudged her gently, and with his support, she lowered herself beside the cub, carefully examining its wounds. "Anya, come in." "Anya?" Finn's voice crackled across her comms, filled with equal parts relief and exasperation. "Where the hell are you?" Taking a steadying breath, she responded, We're okay. Sending coordinates. An extraction team, tell them we're bringing back a guest." The aftermath was a blur. Medical teams swarmed over them, treating Anya, Misha, and even the surprisingly docile cub. What was left of her squad looked at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Anya barely registered their words, her focus on Misha, on the vet techs who skillfully cleaned and bandaged his wounds with a wary nervousness they never dared show towards a human patient. The questions would come later about the creatures, the cub, the anomaly that had turned a research outpost into a frozen hellscape. But in that moment, as Misha leaned against her, his body trembling with exhaustion, Anya didn't care about any of it. They'd survived, together, against impossible odds. And perhaps, somewhere amidst the blood and ice, a new understanding had begun to dawn. Not just within the Alliance, but within herself. This bond she shared with Misha, it was a weapon, yes, but also a source of profound strength and the seed of something more. The cub, dubbed Frost by a sentimental technician, was the key to unraveling the mystery of the outpost anomaly. Its presence there was as inexplicable as the grotesque ice monsters. Analysis revealed a strange mutation, a rapid adaptation to its icy environment, far beyond any natural evolutionary process. Yet, Frost didn't exhibit the same aggression as its twisted kin. Dr. Ellis, miraculously alive with only minor injuries, theorized that the outpost's research, delving into the genetic adaptations of extremophiles, had been horrifically corrupted. The creatures were a byproduct, a warning sign of experimentation spiraling out of control. While the scientists puzzled over the how, Anya's question was simpler. Why? Why had Misha been drawn to Frost, sensed a connection with this creature born of scientific hubris? And why did Frost, despite the trauma it endured, not recoil from Misha or Anya herself? Sometimes, Dr. Ellis murmured, observing Anya's interactions with Frost, the answers we seek are not in sophisticated laboratories, but in the bonds we've long overlooked. Her words sparked a new obsession within Anya. She spent hours in Frost's quarantine enclosure, Misha patiently at her side. There was a kinship between them, that much was clear. Misha would gently lick the cub's ears, and it would respond with playful nips, the monstrous creatures they'd fought a fading nightmare. The scientists were fascinated, yet wary. The urge to analyze, to dissect this connection between human, bear, and the mutated cub was ever present. But Anya held them at bay. This wasn't data for their reports. It was something fragile, something she was only beginning to understand. Frost wasn't just an anomaly, but a twisted mirror reflecting a horrifying potential. What if the Beastmasters themselves, pushed further, driven by desperation in the war against the Xylari? What if their ability to understand and bond with animals took a dark turn? "We can't let this happen again," she declared at a briefing, her voice echoing in the cold formality of the war room. The generals, admirals, even the stoic Krell commanders shifted uneasily. They were used to her insights into animal behavior, less comfortable with her defiant tone. "The Beastmasters, the bonds we form, it's a gift," Anya continued, "but it's one we must use with wisdom, not just to win battles, but to protect life. If we treat animals as mere tools, then what does that make us?" The debate that raged afterwards was long and heated. Yet, in the end, a grudging agreement was made. The Beastmaster program would be strictly limited. Its focus shifted towards rescue and rehabilitation, not just combat. They were too valuable in the war against the Xylari to be entirely disbanded, but Anya had secured a vital sliver of hope. Perhaps, out of the icy hellscape of that outpost, a better future could be forged. News of Anya's stand reached Vek unexpectedly. The warrior spent long hours in his secluded quarters aboard the Krell flagship when not on the battlefield. Reports of the human female intrigued him, as did the dispatches describing her bond with the bear, and, even more disturbingly, with the corrupted ice creature. Krell warriors respected strength, ruthlessness. These Beastmasters, they were something else, something his species had dismissed as weakness. Yet, their achievements were undeniable. As the war dragged on, the Xylari hive mind became more adaptable, evolving to counter Krell tactics. Human ingenuity, their adaptability forged through strange alliances with beasts, proved surprisingly effective in disrupting the insectoid foe. Vek sought out older records, not of battles, but of forgotten Krell lore. It brought him to the legend of Grivler, an ancient warrior queen, whispered to have ridden a beast not into battle, but into the shadowy heart of an underworld during a year of great famine. She'd returned with knowledge that saved her people, so the tales claimed. The story was dismissed by most modern Krell as myth. Yet it resonated with Vek in a way the glorious battle sagas never had. Was true power merely conquest and domination, or could it lie in understanding, even in forming reluctant bonds with creatures dismissed as lesser? If it had saved a starving people, could it perhaps save the Krell from a war they waged with diminishing returns? Seeking out the human female was risky. Their forces were technically allies, yet old mistrust simmered beneath the surface. Appearing alone before her, unarmed, would be seen as either supreme arrogance or suicidal foolishness. But Vek's warrior instincts, honed not just on the battlefield but in the murky depths of his own questioning mind, told him this was a gamble worth taking. The human camp was surprisingly Spartan, hastily assembled on a harsh, windswept plain recently wrested from the Xylari. As Vek approached, weapons were raised, humans, and even a few wary Krell guards tensing. His translator struggled to find the correct words. "I seek the Beastmaster," he finally declared, his voice rough. "I would speak with her." The message was relayed, and the response was slow in coming. Vek wasn't surprised, and he endured the suspicious stares with stoic resignation. When the summons finally arrived, he was escorted not to a formal meeting room, but to a simple field tent humming with the low roar of a climate control unit. Inside, the human female sat with her back to him, tending to the young ice creature. Frost, they called it, though its form was already growing more monstrous, the mutated adaptations becoming more pronounced. Beside her, the massive white bear shifted restlessly, its gaze never leaving the Krell intruder. "So," Anya said without turning around, "a Krell, alone, want to surrender, or is this some kind of trick?" Her voice held a hard edge, honed by countless battles and betrayals. "Neither," Vek rasped, stepping further into the tent. "I come seeking knowledge." Anya finally turned, her eyes narrowing. "Knowledge? From me?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "Isn't it the mighty Krell who are supposed to have all the answers?" "We are skilled in war," Vek admitted, the word strange on his tongue. "And yet, this conflict, it defies our usual strategies. Your tactics, those of the other Beastmasters, they disrupt what we have known for centuries." He gestured towards Frost, who had begun sniffing the air curiously, tilting its strangely shaped head. "And this creature, it should be a mindless abomination, yet there is a connection between you, even though it is an unnatural thing." Anya stood slowly, placing herself between Vek and Frost. Misha rumbled low in his throat, a warning the Krell couldn't mistake. "Knowledge is freely given to our allies," she said, her voice cold. "But you're not here as a friend, are you?" Vek drew himself up to his full height. "I am here as a warrior who sees his people on a path to ruin. Perhaps, in these alliances you forge, there lies a wisdom we Krell have forgotten." Silence stretched between them. Anya looked at him with the intensity of a predator assessing its prey. Finally, she turned to Misha, placing a hand calmingly on his massive head. The bear huffed but subsided. "Sit," she instructed Vek, pointing to a simple field cot. He did so cautiously, his segmented tail twitching in unease. Yet Anya made no move to disarm him, her trust a fragile thing yet to be earned. "Start from the beginning," she said, folding her arms. "Tell me why a Krell warrior seeks the secrets of a Beastmaster." And so, Vek began to speak. He told of his initial encounter with Anya and Misha, the fear that turned to fascination. Of the battle on Kithos Roman III, of his delving into human history, their strange partnerships with animals both mighty and mundane. He spoke haltingly, the human words awkward on his tongue, but with a sincerity that surprised even himself. Anya listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he faltered, she offered no encouragement, yet no interruption. As the tale reached the legends of Grivler, the ancient Krell queen, a flicker of something like recognition passed over her face. When Vek finished, the silence seemed to fill the tent. Finally, Anya spoke. "So you think I'm going to teach you our secrets? Help you turn your war beasts into the perfect, obedient soldiers?" "No," Vek said vehemently. "I see what our attempts at domination have wrought. Mindless aggression, turning beasts into weapons that lash out even at our own. There must be another way." Anya regarded the Krell warrior with cautious scrutiny. His words were unexpected, the vulnerability he displayed even more so. But years of conflict had taught her to be wary, even of those who appeared to offer an olive branch. "And what makes you think I'd help?" she asked bluntly. "The Krell have never been ones to share power. What's this sudden change of heart?" "It is not weakness to admit ignorance," Vek countered, his voice low. The old ways, they only bring bloodshed without lasting gain. I have seen your bond with the bear. It is not subservience, there's respect. Is that what saved your people in the ancient tales? Anya hesitated. Speaking of the bond, even with Frost and Misha, who understood only the tone of her voice, not the words themselves, felt like a betrayal. But the desperation in the Krell's voice struck a chord within her. You're right, she admitted finally. There's wisdom in the old stories. Not just for humans, but all species. We learn from the creatures around us, if we bother to listen. She walked to a small table, retrieving a battered data pad. This is a collection of animal behavior studies. Basic observations, things your scientists probably dismiss as irrelevant. Tossing it to Vek, she continued, it's a start. But understanding comes from more than just reading. You want to learn the Beastmaster way? Then you'll prove it. How? He asked, confusion evident in his posture. Anya gestured towards Frost, who was gnawing curiously on a discarded medkit. That creature is a testament to science gone wrong. The bond between Misha and Frost, it's tenuous, fragile, but there's potential for healing, for guiding it back to something closer to what it should be. She looked Vek directly in the eye. You want to change the Krell way of war? Then you'll start here. Help me understand this creature, work alongside us, not as a conqueror, but as a student. Vek blinked, his multitude of eyes seeming to reflect utter bewilderment. I work with the beast? And with me, Anya added, a hint of challenge in her voice. This isn't about charity. If you prove yourself, maybe we can talk about your war beasts. But for now, you learn from the bottom up. The Krell sat in silence for a long moment. Then, with a jerky nod, said, I accept. Anya felt a flicker of surprise. This proud warrior, agreeing to such a seemingly menial task, it was either the most elaborate deception or a sign that perhaps, amidst the horrors of this galactic conflict, a seed of change had been planted. Vek's first days working with Anya were humbling. The Krell had always prided themselves on directness, on bold action rewarded with swift and preferably brutal results. Anya's approach was frustratingly indirect. They spent hours simply observing Frost, not in a sterile laboratory, but within its enclosure. Vek grumbled about the indignity of being forced to crouch amidst scattered chew toys and half-digested rations. Anya simply pointed out that understanding Frost's behavior required understanding its environment. See how it favors that corner, she murmured, noting the way the mutated cub curled protectively against a pile of synthetic thermal blankets. There's a draft there. The climate control isn't quite right. Makes it irritable. Vek blinked. Had they not just won a decisive battle through superior Krell firepower? Why did finicky temperature regulation matter? Then came Anya's attempts to engage him with Misha. This proved even more perplexing. He likes having his chin scratched, she explained, demonstrating on the surprisingly docile bear. Builds trust. You try. Vek, with his chitinous claws and warrior's focus on threat assessment, couldn't comprehend this concept. The first attempt earned him a low growl that made even hardened human soldiers flinch. Maybe offer him a treat, he suggested. That is how one motivates a lesser creature. Anya merely raised an eyebrow and held out a piece of dried fish. Misha, she said gently, and the bear delicately took the treat from her hand. Days turned into weeks. The progress was slow, measured not in victories, but in subtle shifts in Frost's behavior. It began to tolerate Vek's presence at a distance. It even hesitantly accepted the crude imitation of Anya's chin scratch that was the best his claws could manage, rumbling with a sound that might have been a purr. Anya was merciless in dissecting his mistakes, but also surprisingly patient. One evening, after a breakthrough where Vek correctly identified Frost's distress signals before a destructive outburst, Anya handed him a steaming mug. Coffee, she explained with a small smile. It's an acquired taste. Vek sipped cautiously, the bitter brew making him grimace. And this is a reward? It helps keep you awake during long observation shifts, she replied. which, I'm sure you've realized, are a big part of this work. It was the closest thing to camaraderie they'd shared yet. Word of Vek's unusual apprenticeship spread. At first, it was whispered among the human troops, then filtered through to the Krell forces. Reactions among his own kind were mixed. Some dismissed it as a ploy, a human trick to weaken a potential rival. Others, younger warriors who'd witnessed the Xylari's growing resistance to traditional Krell tactics, began to watch with grudging curiosity. The elders, predictably, were outraged. Vek was summoned before the Krell High Command, the echoing chamber filled with the outraged clicks and hisses of his superiors. "You shame us," the elder matriarch declared, her voice echoing with barely restrained fury. A warrior of the Imperium, groveling before a human and her primitive pet. "We forge alliances based on strength," another elder rasped, "not by imitating the weak." Vek stood stoically amidst the verbal onslaught. He'd expected this. "Alliances forged in domination crumble," he countered, his voice deliberately calm. "The Xylari adapt, they counter our strategies. This human, her beasts, they disrupt, they find weaknesses we cannot anticipate." "They are tricks, abominations," the matriarch retorted. "You would betray the legacy of our ancestors for what? A few victories against a hive of insects?" "I would ensure our people survive this war," Vek said firmly, "and perhaps forge a future where the Imperium is not built on the broken backs of enslaved beasts, but on bonds that strengthen us all." His defiance was met with hisses of displeasure, yet a flicker of uncertainty passed over some of the elders' faces. The matriarch, after a tense silence, spoke again, her voice lower. "You have brought shame upon your Talon squad," she declared. "You are stripped of rank, relieved of duties. Yet, this war leaves little room for tradition. Continue with the human, prove this path has merit, or your exile will be made permanent." It was a punishment, but also a lifeline. Returning to Anya's makeshift camp, Vek felt a strange mix of relief and determination. Exile was a harsh fate, yet he still had a chance to prove himself, to show that the path of the Beastmaster was one even the mighty Krell might cautiously follow. News of a potential breakthrough on the Xylari front buzzed through the Alliance network. Not a grand military engagement, but something subtler. Anya and a select few Beastmasters, aided unexpectedly by their Krell counterparts who followed Vek's unorthodox example, were making headway in understanding Xylari communication. It wasn't the clean, decipherable signals the Alliance linguists hoped for, but an intricate language of pheromones, hisses, and subtle changes in swarm density. Misha, with his keen sense of smell and Anya's careful interpretations, proved instrumental in isolating a particular scent that seemed to correlate with panic or disarray within the hive clusters. Dr. Ellis, initially skeptical of the entire concept, found herself grudgingly impressed. "It's like those studies on honeybees," she murmured, poring over data readouts. "Individual signals are meaningless, but the complex pattern, it reveals a possible exploit." Working alongside the humans in their strange alliance with animals was a disorienting experience for Vek. Yet he couldn't deny the results. Identifying triggers for chaos within the Xylari hordes allowed for targeted strikes, disrupting their usual overwhelming numbers advantage. The victories were small, hard-won, but they were victories nonetheless. Reports filtered back to the Krell command. The matriarch's silence was a tense thing, but so far there was no order for Vek's arrest or the termination of the program he'd started. One freezing evening, after a day spent monitoring a Xylari scouting party, Anya approached him. The shadows beneath her eyes spoke of exhaustion, but there was a determined spark there as well. "We've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant. "Or well, Dr. Ellis, Finn, and I, it's a crazy idea. High risk. But if it works..." She outlined a plan so audacious that Vek let out a low hiss of surprise. It involved using the pheromone triggers they'd identified, luring a Xylari cluster into a carefully orchestrated ambush, and the key to its success lay with one of the mutated ice creatures, similar to Frost, that they'd managed to capture and partially rehabilitate. The creature can mimic the scent, Anya explained, her eyes intense. Amplify it. If we can control it, position it correctly. We could turn their own tactics against them, Vek finished, his mind whirling. The plan was reckless, dangerous, and hinged entirely on trusting both the unpredictable response of a corrupted beast and the fragile control the Beastmasters had established over it. But the potential reward, the chance to deal a significant blow to the Xylari horde, it was too tempting to ignore. The preparation was meticulous. Biologists worked in shifts to condition the mutated creature, dubbed Echo for its ability to replicate Xylari pheromonic signals. Anya, along with a handful of other Beastmasters and even a few of Vek's more open-minded Krell followers, trained relentlessly with Echo. Echo was no Misha. Its mind was scarred from its unnatural creation, its instincts veering between feral aggression and cowering fear. Yet, the bond the Beastmasters forged, however fragile, was its lifeline. Touch, carefully calibrated rewards, and hours spent simply sitting in its presence seemed to calm its chaotic impulses, at least to a degree. Vek participated in grueling simulations, learning the human tactics of coordinated ambush while directing Echo. The creature was fitted with a crude neural interface, a compromise reached after Anya flatly forbade the full control rigs the Krell usually employed with their subjugated beasts. It has to be able to trust us, she argued fiercely to the Alliance tacticians. If we overload it with commands, it'll panic and the whole plan goes up in flames. Literally, probably. The day of the ambush dawned cold and bleak. The strike force was small, lightly armed, focused on speed and precision. Anya, with Misha, and Vek with Echo, occupied a forward position, hidden amidst a treacherous field of jagged ice formations. "This is it," Anya whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Echo, remember our training, okay, girl?" The mutated bear let out a keening cry, its body quivering with a mix of fear and anticipation. Gently, Anya stroked its scarred hide, her murmurs a soothing counterpoint to the hiss of battle commands relayed through Vek's translator. The Xylari vanguard appeared, a writhing mass of insectile bodies skittering across the ice. Anya raised a signal beacon, and a flare arced across the sky, blindingly bright against the desolate landscape. "Let's give them a warm welcome," Vek rasped. His command triggered the release of Echo. Guided by a combination of simple visual cues and the lightest of neural nudges, the creature lumbered out of its hiding place. It held the crude pheromone emitters the scientists had devised, a grotesque device strapped to its malformed back. The Xylari, initially confused, responded with the chilling precision they were known for. Their formation split, pincers closing in towards the beacon of fear and aggression Echo was broadcasting. The main strike force surged out from their hidden positions, raking the Xylari flanks with blaster fire. The insects went into disarray. It was a glorious, chaotic mess just as Anya had planned. Chaos, however, was a double-edged sword. The Xylari, disrupted but far from routed, lashed out with mindless fury. A stray blast sent an ice spire shattering, shrapnel-like shards cutting across Echo's exposed flank. The creature screeched, not in pain, but in a primal surge of terror. Vek swore in Krell, his translator struggling to keep up. "She's panicking. I'm losing control." "Stay on target," Anya shouted, the calm in her voice belied by the tension etched on her face. "Misha, with me." Breaking cover, she surged forward, Misha an echoing phantom of white in the maelstrom of the battle. The Xylari, their scent receptors overloading with Echo's frantic pheromones, barely registered their approach. Anya scrambled towards the thrashing Echo, dodging stray claws and snapping insectoid limbs. "Echo," she called, her voice a beacon amidst the din. "Focus. Remember." An explosion rocked the battlefield, not Alliance munitions, but a concentrated blast from the main Xylari cluster. Echo, already on the verge of collapse, shrieked as the blast wave washed over her. The carefully calibrated pheromone emitters sparked and went dark. Vek let out a strangled hiss. "She's lost it. Abort. Abort the mission." The remnants of his Krell training, the instinct to dominate, to cut losses, overwhelmed his newfound trust in Anya's methods. But Anya wasn't listening. Reaching Echo, she scrambled onto its trembling back, ignoring its terrified thrashing, heedless of the Xylari closing in. The interface, a compromise to begin with, had short-circuited in the blast. Anya was cut off, her only link to Echo a hand pressed urgently against its coarse, scarred fur. "Easy, girl," she whispered, the words meaningless to the creature, but the tone a balm against its mindless terror. Remember the ice caves, the warm blankets." Slowly, the thrashing subsided. Echo whimpered, tilting her head back to look at Anya with eyes that held a flicker of the monstrous cub they'd first encountered. "That's it," Anya murmured, then louder, echoing the training signals. "Echo, target forward." The connection, tenuous as a spiderweb, held. With an agonized roar, Echo surged forward, not towards Anya, but towards the main Xylari cluster. What remained of the pheromone emitters flared back to life, broadcasting not uncontrolled fear now, but focused, primal rage. The Xylari hesitated, then surged towards their own ranks, a wave of snapping claws and screeching fury. The Alliance forces, seizing the moment, poured fire into the disintegrating insectoid ranks. It was a rout, a glorious, chaotic victory snatched from the jaws of potential disaster. In the aftermath, as the medics fretted over both Anya and Echo, the scientists buzzed with excitement, and the weary troops slumped in exhausted relief. Vek had a choice to make. The Krell matriarch's communications crackled with terse, grudging acknowledgement. The plan had succeeded beyond expectations. His exile, it seemed, would be rescinded. And yet, watching Anya cradling Echo's massive head in her lap, whispering reassurances despite her own injuries, made something shift within him. Victory was sweet, but it was also messy, filled with desperation. This path Anya followed, with its emphasis on bonds over brute force, had achieved what years of Krell conquest could not. Was mere triumph enough? "Anya," he rasped, approaching cautiously. The human looked up, wary but not surprised. He began, then stumbled. The words, so clear in his mind, felt clumsy in his mouth. "You were right, about the beasts. True power, it is not just in controlling them." Anya merely nodded, then gestured to Echo. "She's still scared," she murmured, "but she trusts us? A little. It's a start." "Will she be like the others?" Vek asked, his gaze locked on Misha, who watched them with calm, intelligent eyes. Anya shook her head, a flicker of sadness passing over her face. "The damage is too deep. Echo will never be fully healed, not the way she should have been. But we can give her a life free of pain, free of fear, with work, maybe even moments of joy." Vek digested her words, then turned and issued commands into his translator. There were calls to make, orders to be given. His fellow Krell would be given a choice: return to the old ways, or remain here, learning the path of the Beastmaster. Most, he predicted, would balk. But a few might see what he now saw. It would be slow, the shift would be filled with tension, with setbacks, but it was a beginning. When he finished, he turned back to Anya, and to his surprise, found her smiling. It was a weary smile, but genuine. "Welcome to the mess," she said quietly. "We're going to need all the help we can get." Vek felt an unfamiliar sensation, something akin to relief, perhaps even a sliver of hope. "Then let us begin," he replied, and this time the words flowed not from duty, but from a newly awakened conviction. The war dragged on. The Xylari evolved, relentlessly adapting to the Alliance's unorthodox tactics, just as the Alliance forces adapted in turn. Yet, a change had occurred. Vek's Talon squad returned, those warriors who had dared to follow his audacious gamble. They brought with them a handful of Krell beasts, not massive Drakkar, but smaller, swifter creatures resembling spiny reptiles, bred traditionally as scouts rather than weapons. The training wasn't easy. Years of ingrained brutality had to be unlearned. Krell warriors accustomed to shock collars and neural whips recoiled from the quiet patience Anya and her fellow Beastmasters displayed. More than one young Krell stalked off in disgust, unwilling to tolerate the slow pace, the emphasis on earning trust rather than asserting dominance. But some stayed, Vek amongst them, finding a strange kind of satisfaction in learning to soothe a skittish mount, in recognizing the subtle shift in its posture from fear to hesitant curiosity. The change within himself surprised him the most. The impatient warrior was still there, but tempered by a newfound understanding of the delicate balance between strength and restraint. The mutated ice creatures posed the greatest challenge. Even Anya's expertise couldn't fully undo the damage wrought upon them. Yet they began to thrive, in a way. A new enclosure was built, mimicking both the icy landscapes they'd been torn from and the sterile environments they'd suffered within. Frost, the first and gentlest of the rescued horrors, slowly began to play again, to rediscover simple bear instincts lost amidst the genetic manipulation. There were whispers, among the humans and Krell alike, that Anya's methods were too soft, too focused on healing rather than victory. There were days when she herself questioned the cost, those moments when Echo's agonized roars echoed a torment that no amount of gentle touch could erase. Then came the mission that turned the tide. Not against the Xylati, but on a newly liberated planet, pockmarked with the scars of orbital bombardment. The Krell, following their usual post-victory protocols, began rounding up the few surviving natives, a spindly avian species, deemed too primitive to even warrant the effort of conquest, but still viewed as a potential nuisance. It was Vek who stopped the patrol, who put his newfound authority on the line. These creatures, he declared, his voice ringing in the devastated landscape, they understand their world in ways we don't. They can lead us to survivors, to hidden resources. The older Krell scoffed, calling him a fool, sentimental, echoing the accusations that had been hurled at Anya since the war's start. But the younger warriors, those who had trained with the reptiles, who had felt the bond begin to grow, they hesitated. It was Misha who sealed the argument. With Anya's quiet command, the bear lowered his great head, sniffing the scorched earth. Then, with purposeful strides, he moved towards a seemingly unremarkable pile of rubble. Digging with surprising gentleness, he revealed a hidden burrow, its feathered occupants blinking in the harsh sunlight. Respect, however grudging, flared in the eyes of even the most traditional Krell. And later, as the avian survivors began leading Alliance forces to hidden water caches and underground shelters, Anya caught Vek's gaze. In it, she saw not just the echo of triumph, but a shared understanding that victory could come in many forms. Years turned into a decade, the war fading from a constant roar to echoing skirmishes on distant worlds. The Alliance had learned, adapted. Anya, no longer a lone figure amidst skeptical soldiers, led a growing Beastmaster Corps. Krell warriors trained alongside humans, their mounts a testament to the power of the slowly forged bonds. The change was not without pain. Old hatreds flared, fueled by whispers that the humans, with their insidious, gentle tactics, were weakening the once mighty Krell. Vek crushed more than one budding rebellion among his own kind, the swift violence a brutal reminder that the old ways died hard. Then there was Echo. Her monstrous form grew, the malformed limbs and icy protrusions making her a terrifying sight to those unfamiliar with the kind heart within. Frost, smaller and gentler, acted as a protector to his fellow abomination. His playful nips at Echo's scarred hide a testament to the strange friendships forged amidst shared trauma. Anya aged, the harsh conditions of countless campaigns etching lines on her face. Yet, her eyes held the same determined spark she possessed when he'd first encountered her, that fateful day amidst the diplomatic incident with the bear at her side. Misha, miraculously, seemed untouched by time. His fur remained a pristine white, his playful spirit undimmed, a constant in a world forever shifting. One crystal-clear night on a newly terraformed colony world, Vek found Anya on an observation platform overlooking the flickering lights of the fledgling settlement. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice tinged with a weariness he'd come to recognize. "Not the glorious conquest we were promised as younglings," Vek rasped, settling beside her. There was no need for translators anymore. He'd learned her language through grueling lessons that were also, strangely, moments of shared laughter and understanding. She smiled faintly. Perhaps better. We learn, we change, even us old, stubborn creatures. She nudged him with a surprising playfulness. Silence fell, comfortable between them. Finally, Vek spoke, the question echoing in his mind for years. Will you return to your own world, now that this mess is nearing an end? Anya looked out at the stars, those pinpricks of light that held both the promise of new beginnings and the potential for new conflicts. This is my home now, she said quietly. Misha and I, we've built a life here, and there's so much more work to be done. There will always be wars to fight, Vek stated, a hint of his old fatalism in his voice. And there will always be bonds to forge, Anya countered. Between creatures, between worlds, that kind of peace, I think, is worth fighting for. Vek turned towards her, and in the starlight, he saw the echo of that bold young warrior who had risked everything to follow an unorthodox path. Then I will continue to fight at your side, he vowed. Peace, Anya discovered, was just as messy and exhausting as war. Conflicts simmered on the fringes of the alliance, fueled by old rivalries and species on the lower rungs of galactic society who saw their chance to seize power amidst the chaos. Yet, the war with the Xylari had forced changes, both grudging and genuine. News reached them of a remote world, long dismissed as barren. A joint alliance survey team, led by Anya's students and a new generation of Krell warriors, made a startling discovery. Buried beneath the ice were traces of an ancient civilization, not one of advanced technology, but of a profound understanding of their world's ecosystem. The find sent ripples through the scientific community. There were the usual debates: had this species achieved true peace only to fall into obscurity? Or were their methods too tied to their specific world to be replicable across the vast, chaotic expanse of the galaxy? Vek, now a seasoned commander, weathered by battles and tense peace negotiations alike, had a more pragmatic view. They survived where flashier empires crumbled, he pointed out during a briefing filled with the usual mix of eager young faces and those grizzled with skepticism. We should be studying their mistakes as much as their triumphs. As the debate raged, Anya found herself drawn into orbit around the desolate, ice-locked world. It resonated strangely with a place where her journey had truly begun, that outpost echoing with unnatural horrors. But here, there was a different kind of silence, the whispers of a civilization in harmony with its harsh environment. Misha, ever her constant companion, nudged her with his great head as they stood gazing down at the icy plains. It was a gesture of curiosity, certainly, but also a reassurance. They'd seen the best and worst the galaxy had to offer, the echoes of that first, chilling encounter with the monstrous ice creatures now woven into the complex tapestry of their shared experience. Perhaps, Anya murmured, more to herself than to her companion. Perhaps what we found there, in the lab, it was a warning. We push nature too far, twist it out of greed or desperation, and it twists back, turns monstrous. Anya spent weeks on the planet's surface, poring over the remnants of the lost civilization. There were no grand monuments, no energy weapons, just intricately carved tools, seed pods frozen in time, songs passed down through oral tradition and translated with painstaking care by linguists. What emerged was a picture of a species deeply connected to its environment, adapting alongside it, not seeking to dominate or change it. They learned to thrive within limits, she explained to Vek upon her return, not the limits of conquest, but the limits of their own world. It wasn't weakness, it was a different kind of strength entirely. The concept of thriving within limits was alien to a galaxy raised on wars of expansion. Anya's findings were hailed as a breakthrough by some, and dismissed as impractical romanticism by others. The Krell, their empire forever scarred by the conflict with the Xylari, were among the most divided. Vek's once radical embrace of the Beastmaster ways had tempered into a cautious pragmatism. He saw their value in preserving post-war ecosystems, in using the bonds with animals to rebuild worlds ravaged by conflict. Yet, the whispers of the old guard grew louder in his ears. Was this truly the future of the Krell? Farmers and peacekeepers rather than conquerors? Anya sensed his disquiet. They were decades older now. Misha's fur was tinged with silver, and while his spirit remained undimmed, Anya herself wore the toll of relentless travel and endless battles for hearts and minds. One evening, amidst the sterile confines of a hastily constructed Alliance outpost, she found him gazing not at strategic maps, but at a worn data pad displaying images of Krell hatchlings. "They will not know the old ways," he murmured, a note of desolate pride in his voice. "They will be raised alongside scaled hounds and feathered scouts, learning gentleness before aggression." "Is that a lament?" Anya asked softly. Vek turned those multifaceted eyes on her, the glow within them dimmed by a weariness she mirrored. "It is change," he rasped. "The Krell I knew, we are fading, as perhaps we must. But what will rise in our place? Will it be strong enough to face what the galaxy inevitably will throw at us?" She sat beside him, the movement stiff, her old injuries protesting the simple act. "Strength comes in many forms, old friend," she said, the echo of their shared battles and the rough familiarity of her tone. "Remember the avian creatures, how they led us to safety. We were the conquerors, with our warships and lasers, yet they knew what we did not." "Survival is not the same as greatness," Vek countered, the age-old Krell arrogance flaring briefly. "Maybe not," Anya conceded. "But perhaps there's a different kind of greatness. Not in conquering worlds, but in learning to live alongside them. In building a future where frost is not an aberration, but one of many creatures we walk beside." Silence settled between them, a heavy thing laden with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Finally, Vek turned from the images of hatchlings and met her gaze. "I am too old to see this new path to its end," he admitted, "but I will guide those who walk after me. The Krell cannot survive by clinging to a past that nearly destroyed us." He let out a harsh chuckle. "And who knows, perhaps one day, a Krell warrior and their reptilian mount will save a world by befriending its creatures, not burning them." He stood, his movements carrying the stiffness of his own battles. "Now," he said with forced briskness, "those strategic maps will not analyze themselves." It wasn't a triumphant victory cry, but a hard-won acceptance. As they turned back to the complexities of maintaining a fragile peace, Anya felt a flicker of hope. The galaxy was vast, filled with threats both known and unknown. But here, with this unlikely alliance of human and Krell, with Frost's booming calls answered by Misha's rumbling reply echoing through the outpost, there was a chance. A slim, messy, improbable chance that perhaps a different future was indeed possible. The twilight years of Anya and Vek's lives were a whirlwind, not of battles, but of building. Anya founded a sanctuary, a sprawling haven on a world scarred by conflict, now blooming with new life. Frost and Echo, no longer monstrous but still undeniably products of twisted science, became its guardians. Their roars echoed not in terror, but in a strange, haunting song that drew in rescued creatures from across the sector. Vek, ever the pragmatist, lobbied fiercely for a formal integration of the Beastmaster Corps into the Alliance military. What had once been an unorthodox experiment became a respected, if still debated, institution. Krell academies modernized, the harsh training grounds now also echoing with the yipping calls of young reptilian mounts and the whistles of fledgling handlers finding their bond amidst supervised chaos. There were setbacks. Whispers of a new threat brewing on the outer rim turned into panicked reports of a bioweapon gone rogue. Anya, summoned urgently, found the scientists fumbling, trapped in old patterns, desperately seeking a technological counter to a monstrous disease. It was Misha, with his unwavering sense of smell, who identified the point of origin, leading Anya through the twisting corridors of an overrun facility. It was her voice, echoing his primal growl, that calmed an infected, terrified creature long enough for a cure to be administered. The victory, when it came, was quiet. A new formula rushed into production, a crisis averted. Yet it was in these moments, not amidst grand pronouncements on gleaming flagships, that Anya found a strange kind of contentment. Vek, despite his success as a leader, was drawn back to the simplicity of his early days as a Beastmaster. He retired with honors, not to a sprawling estate, but to a small homestead on a frontier world. His reptilian mounts thrived in the harsh climate, and he spent his days tending to the land rather than commanding legions. Word spread of a weathered Krell, his translator discarded, who taught local children the language of the scaled creatures that roamed the hills, ensuring harmony rather than conflict. One season, a small figure appeared on his doorstep. Anya, her hair fully white now but her gaze still sharp, stood with Misha at her side. The years had softened her, but also etched a quiet determination into her every line. "Time for a new adventure, my old friend?" she asked, a teasing glint in her eye. Vek hesitated for only a moment before a slow smile spread across his chitinous face. "Perhaps," he admitted, turning to glance out at the sun setting over the rolling landscape. "There are many ways to change a world." They left the next day, not on sleek warships, but in a repurposed transport vessel overflowing with rescued saplings. Misha, with surprising agility despite his age, clambered aboard, curling up amidst the supplies with a contented sigh. Their destination was a newly discovered planet, teeming with life but precariously balanced. Anya and Vek, seasoned explorers, seasoned warriors, now turned their attention to a different kind of battle. Not against insectoid hordes or scheming warlords, but against ecological collapse, against the age-old threats of greed and short-sighted exploitation. Armed with knowledge hard-won over decades, fueled by the unbreakable bonds they'd forged, they began their work. Because the fight for a better galaxy, Anya had learned, never truly ends. It merely changes form, the battlegrounds shifting, the enemies evolving. But somewhere amidst the endless struggles, in the laughter of children learning the whistle calls of feathered creatures, in the protective rumble of a once monstrous bear now echoing with contentment, there was the stubborn, enduring flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were building a future where the words human and Krell, beast and warrior, might one day mean something profoundly different, a future where the bond between them was not a weapon, but the foundation for a better, kinder, ever-evolving galaxy. The records are fragmentary, as history so often is. There are official alliance accounts describing the pivotal role of the Beastmaster Corps in ending the Xylari War, their continued success in post-conflict ecological restoration projects. Data on the sanctuary established by Anya is plentiful, its careful rehabilitation programs, its impact on reducing human-animal conflicts across multiple sectors. Mentions of Vek lore Santris are less detailed. The Krell Empire's archives underwent a purge during a period of political upheaval several decades after his retirement. What remains are scattered references to a frontier homestead, notable for its high yield of frost-resistant crops, and its unusual population of reptilian creatures thriving in the harsh climate. Scholars argue over whether this hints at a secret Krell bioweapon project, or is just an eccentric old warrior's hobby. But then there are the stories. Stories passed down in hushed whispers around campfires on backwater worlds, of a woman who walked with a bear so white he shimmered like starlight, a Krell who spoke the tongue of sandworms. Tales of children learning to calm monstrous, feathered beasts, echoing the ancient legends of their own ancestors. There are even grainy vids, their origins questionable, showing these impossible figures amidst landscapes both familiar and utterly alien. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Anya and Vek were not mythical heroes, but flawed, complex beings shaped by war and driven by a desperate hope to do better. Their victories were small, their defeats many. They were, in the grand cosmic scale, insignificant. Yet, the ripples of their actions lived on. In the quiet efficiency of Beastmaster Corps embedded across the Alliance, in the shifting attitudes of the once conquering Krell, in the sanctuary that became a place of not just healing, but of daring experimentation in interspecies cooperation, these were their legacies. The galaxy remained a chaotic, often brutal place. Wars flared, fueled by old hatreds and new rivalries. Yet, amidst the bloodshed, there were those who looked out at the stars and saw not just territories to conquer, but worlds teeming with life both strange and wondrous. They were scientists, explorers, and yes, warriors, who had learned a different kind of strength. Not the strength of the laser blast or subjugation collar, but the strength of understanding, patience, and the trust woven within bonds so easily dismissed as mere sentimentality. And somewhere, on a world none would ever remember the name of, a gnarled, weathered hand rests on the scaled hide of a creature that should not be. Ancient eyes, human and reptilian, look up at a sunrise painted in colors beyond words. There is peace there, hard-won and easily shattered, but peace nonetheless. In the quiet echo of a bear's rumbling purr and the soft clicking of approval in return, there is a testament to the stubborn, improbable belief that a better future, for all creatures walking the stars, might be possible. After all, hadn't it begun with the most impossible of friendships?